They told me the ocean has no ghosts. They lied. I learned the truth 300 feet below the surface, in the pitch-black waters where sunlight has never reached, where the pressure can crush a man's skull like an eggshell, and where something that should not exist has been waiting for longer than any of us can imagine. My name is Robert, and I am 29 years old. I have served aboard the USS Shadowfin for 3 years now, and in that time I have seen things that would make even the bravest sailor abandon ship and never look back. This is not a story about adventure or heroism. This is a confession, a warning, and perhaps a plea for understanding. Because what happens in the deep places of the ocean stays in the deep places, unless someone has the courage or the foolishness to drag it into the light. The USS Shadowfin operates in classified waters, somewhere in the vast expanse between the Pacific Northwest coast and the dark trenches that run along the continental shelf. I cannot tell you exactly where, not because I am forbidden, but because I genuinely do not know. Our navigation systems often show coordinates that make no sense, and our maps have blank spaces where entire sections of ocean should be marked. We are sent on missions that have no clear objective, patrols that follow no logical pattern, and operations that are redacted from official records before we even surface. I am writing this during my shore leave, sitting in a motel room in a small coastal town whose name I will not mention. The walls are thin, the bed is uncomfortable, and the sound of the ocean outside my window fills me with a dread that I cannot shake. I need someone to know what has been happening down there. I need someone to understand that the rules we follow aboard the Shadowfin are not just military procedures or safety protocols. They are survival instructions written in the blood and madness of crews who came before us. Before I explain what has been happening, you need to understand something fundamental about submarine life. We spend months underwater, cut off from sunlight, from fresh air, from the sky, from everything that makes us feel connected to the world above. The sun becomes a distant memory. The pressure outside the hull is so immense that a single breach would implode the entire vessel in less than a second. The darkness beyond our portholes is absolute and endless. And in that darkness, things move, things watch, things wait for the right moment to make their presence known. When I first joined the crew of the Shadowfin, I was excited, proud even. I had completed my training at the top of my class. I had studied every manual, passed every test, and earned the respect of my instructors. I thought I was prepared for anything the Navy could throw at me. I was wrong. Nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to experience. My first day aboard was like any other, or so I thought. The submarine was docked at a remote naval base hidden in an inlet, surrounded by dense forest and steep cliffs. The base itself was unmarked, unlisted, and unknown to most of the military establishment. Even the bus that brought us there had blacked out windows, and the driver never spoke a single word during the 3-hour journey from the nearest city. The Shadowfin was older than I expected, a Cold War-era vessel that had been retrofitted with modern technology, but still retained that ancient, haunted quality that old ships seemed to possess. The hull was scarred and dented. The paint was faded and peeling in places, and there was a smell about it that I could not quite identify. It was not the usual smell of oil, metal, and seawater that permeates every naval vessel. This was something else, something organic and wrong, like the scent of decay mixed with something sickeningly sweet. The captain, a man named James, was waiting for me at the gangway. He was in his mid-50s with gray hair cropped close to his skull, deep-set eyes that seemed to look right through you, and a face that was all hard angles and sharp lines. He looked like a man who had seen too much and lived too long with the weight of terrible knowledge. "Welcome aboard, sailor," he said, his voice rough and gravelly. "I am Captain James. You will follow my orders without question, without hesitation, and without complaint. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," I replied, standing at attention. He studied me for a long moment, his eyes searching my face for something I could not name. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Good, come with me. There is something you need to see before we dive." I followed him through the narrow corridors of the submarine, past rows of bunks where other crew members were preparing for departure, past the galley where the smell of cooking food mixed unpleasantly with the underlying scent of the ship, and finally into the mess hall. The room was empty except for one other person, a young sailor who looked even more nervous than I felt. Captain James gestured for us to sit. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered intermittently, casting strange dancing shadows across the gray metal walls. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out 2 laminated cards, sliding one across the table to me and one to the other sailor. "Read these," he said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Memorize them. Follow them without question, without exception, and without trying to understand why. Your life depends on it. The lives of everyone aboard this vessel depend on it." I picked up the card. It was yellowed with age, the lamination scratched and clouded as though it had been handled by countless sailors before me. At the top, in simple block letters, it read, "The Rules." Below that were 4 rules typed in a font that looked like it came from an old typewriter. The text was clear, but the content made no sense to me at the time. Rule 1. Between the hours of 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., no crew member is permitted to be alone. You must always have at least one other person within sight. If you find yourself alone during these hours, proceed immediately to the mess hall and wait there until 4 a.m. has passed. Do not go to your bunk. Do not go to the bathroom. Do not go anywhere else. If someone tries to convince you to follow them during these hours, refuse. They are not who they appear to be. Rule 2. If you hear knocking on the hull from the outside, do not acknowledge it. Do not look toward the source of the sound. Do not speak about it. Continue your duties as though nothing is happening. The knocking will stop eventually. If it does not stop within 30 minutes, inform the captain immediately, but do so in writing only. Do not speak the words aloud. Rule 3. The forward observation room is off limits to all crew members except the captain and the designated observer. If you are assigned as observer, you will be briefed separately. If you are not assigned as observer, do not ask questions about what happens in that room. If you see the door to that room open when no one should be inside, close it immediately and report to the captain. Do not look inside under any circumstances. Rule 4. If the lights in any section of the submarine begin to flicker in a pattern of 3 short flashes followed by 2 long flashes, evacuate that section immediately and seal the hatches. Do not attempt to investigate the cause. Do not attempt to repair the electrical system. Do not re-enter that section until the captain gives explicit permission. If you see someone still in the section after the lights begin to flicker in this pattern, do not go back for them. They are already gone. I read the rules twice, then looked up at Captain James. "Sir, I do not understand. What is this about?" His expression did not change. "You will understand soon enough. For now, just know that these rules have kept this crew alive for longer than any submarine has the right to remain operational. Men who have broken these rules have disappeared, gone mad, or worse. Do not be one of them." The other sailor, whose name I later learned was Mike, looked as confused and unsettled as I felt. "Sir, what do you mean by worse?" Captain James stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. "You will find out if you are foolish enough to break the rules. I pray you are not." He turned and walked toward the door, then paused and looked back at us. "One more thing. Whatever you see, whatever you hear, whatever you experience down there in the deep, keep it to yourself. The moment you start talking about it, the moment you try to rationalize it or explain it, you give it power. And trust me, it has enough power already." With that, he left the mess hall, leaving Mike and me sitting there in stunned silence, staring at the laminated cards in our hands. That was 3 years ago. Since then, I have learned that every word on that card is true. Every rule exists for a reason, and every reason is rooted in something so terrifying, so incomprehensible, that most people would refuse to believe it. Let me tell you what I have learned. The first time I experienced what we call the graveyard shift, I had been aboard the Shadowfin for about 2 weeks. We were cruising at a depth of 400 feet, somewhere off the coast in waters so dark that our external cameras showed nothing but an endless void. The submarine hummed with its usual sounds, the whir of ventilation systems, the distant clang of pipes expanding and contracting, the low murmur of the reactor deep in the engineering section. I was assigned to the night watch, which meant I would be awake and on duty during the hours when most of the crew was asleep. My partner for the watch was a man named Tyler, a veteran sailor who had been on the Shadowfin for almost 5 years. Tyler was in his early 30s, lean and wiry, with nervous energy that made him constantly fidget with whatever was in his hands. He rarely smiled, and when he did, it never reached his eyes. "First graveyard shift, huh?" Tyler said as we met at the beginning of our watch at 10 p.m. "You read the rules, right?" "Yes," I said. but I still do not really understand what they mean. Tyler nodded slowly. You will. Just make sure you stick close to me between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. No matter what happens, no matter what you hear or see, do not wander off alone, got it? Got it, I replied, though I still did not understand what could possibly happen on a submarine that would require such a specific rule. The watch proceeded normally for the first few hours. We made our rounds, checking gauges, monitoring systems, and noting everything in the logbook. The submarine was running smoothly, and the crew quarters were quiet except for the occasional snore or mutter from someone dreaming in their bunk. Around 1:30 a.m., Tyler started getting visibly anxious. He kept checking his watch, glancing down the corridors and positioning himself so that he always had a clear view of me. I found it odd but did not say anything. He was the experienced one, and I assumed he knew something I did not. At 1:55 a.m., Tyler grabbed my arm. Okay, listen carefully. In 5 minutes, it is going to be 2 a.m. From now until 4 a.m., we stay together. We do not split up for any reason. If you need to take a leak, I go with you. If I need to check something down the corridor, you come with me. No exceptions. Understood? Yes, understood, I said, feeling a chill run down my spine despite the warm, humid air inside the submarine. Good, Tyler said. And one more thing. If you see or hear anything strange, do not react to it. Do not acknowledge it. Just keep moving and stay close to me. I wanted to ask him what he meant by anything strange, but before I could, the ship's clock chimed softly, indicating that it was 2 a.m. At first, nothing happened. The submarine continued its monotonous hum. The lights remained steady and the corridors stayed empty and quiet. Tyler and I continued our rounds, walking side by side through the narrow passageways. Then, at about 2:15 a.m., I heard it, a voice. It was calling my name. Robert. Robert. The voice was faint, barely audible over the ambient noise of the submarine, but it was distinct. It sounded like it was coming from somewhere ahead of us, down one of the side corridors that led to the crew quarters. I stopped walking. Tyler immediately grabbed my arm and pulled me forward. Keep moving, he hissed. Do not listen to it. But someone is calling my name, I said. Maybe someone needs help. No one needs help, Tyler said firmly. No one is calling your name, keep moving. I wanted to argue, but the look in Tyler's eyes stopped me. There was genuine fear there and something else. Recognition. He had heard things like this before. We continued walking, but the voice persisted. Robert, please, I need your help. It sounded closer now, more urgent. It sounded like someone was in pain. Someone was suffering and I was ignoring them. Every instinct in my body told me to turn around, to go investigate, to help whoever was calling for me. But I remembered the rule. Between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., do not be alone. If someone tries to convince you to follow them, refuse. They are not who they appear to be. Tyler, I whispered. What is that? Nothing that matters, he replied. Just keep walking. It will stop eventually, but it did not stop. For the next hour, as we made our rounds through the submarine, the voice followed us. Sometimes it was ahead of us, sometimes behind. Sometimes it seemed to come from inside the walls themselves. It called my name, pleaded with me, begged me to come help, to come see, to come understand. At one point, around 3 a.m., the voice changed. It was no longer calling for help. It was angry. Robert, why would you not help me? I needed you. I called for you. Why did you ignore me? Tyler's grip on my arm tightened. Almost there, he muttered. Just hold on a little longer. Then at 3:45 a.m., something else happened. We were passing through the galley when I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. I turned my head and saw a figure standing at the far end of the galley, near the entrance to the cold storage. It was a man. At least it looked like a man. He was wearing a Navy uniform, the same uniform we all wore, and he was standing completely still facing the wall. His head was tilted at an unnatural angle as though his neck was broken, and his arms hung limply at his sides. Tyler, I whispered. Someone is in the galley. No, there is not, Tyler said without looking. Keep walking, but I can see him. He is right there. No, he is not, Tyler insisted. Whatever you think you are seeing, it is not real. Do not look at it. Do not acknowledge it. Just keep walking. I forced myself to look away from the figure, to focus on Tyler, to put one foot in front of the other. But as we passed through the galley, I could feel eyes on me. I could feel something watching, something waiting, something hungry. Finally, at 4 a.m. exactly, everything stopped. The voice cut off mid-sentence, as though someone had flipped a switch. The oppressive feeling of being watched vanished. The air seemed lighter, easier to breathe. Tyler released my arm and let out a long, shaky breath. "Good job," he said. "You made it through your first graveyard shift." "Not everyone does. What the hell was that?" I demanded, my voice shaking. What was calling my name? What was that thing in the galley? Tyler looked at me with tired, haunted eyes. "Honestly, I do not know. No one knows, but it happens every night between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. Always has, as long as anyone can remember. The previous crew experienced it. The crew before them experienced it. And we experience it now. All I know is that the sailors who have gone off alone during those hours, the ones who followed the voices or went to investigate the things they saw, they never came back. Or if they did come back, they were not the same. They were wrong, changed, empty. What happened to them?" I asked. Tyler shook his head. "I do not want to talk about it. Just know that Rule 1 exists for a reason, and now you know what that reason is. Stick to it and you will be fine. Break it and—" He trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished. I did not press him further. I had learned enough for one night. Over the next 3 years, I experienced the graveyard shift countless times. I heard voices calling my name, my mother's name, my father's name, the names of friends I had not spoken to in years. I saw figures in the corridors, shadows that moved against the light, shapes that followed us from room to room. Sometimes the voices were pleading, sometimes angry, sometimes seductive. Sometimes they promised me things, wonderful things, if I would just step away from my partner for a moment, just go see what they wanted to show me, just listen to what they had to say. I never did. I never broke Rule 1. But I saw what happened to those who did. There was a sailor named Michael who joined the crew about a year after me. He was cocky, confident, and convinced that the rules were just superstition. On his third graveyard shift, he heard a voice that sounded exactly like his girlfriend, crying and begging for help. Against his partner's protests, he ran off down a side corridor to find her. He came back 20 minutes later. At least his body came back. He was walking, breathing, and functioning, but something fundamental was gone. His eyes were empty, his face expressionless. He moved like a puppet on strings, mechanical and awkward. He did not speak unless spoken to, and when he did, his voice was flat and monotone. He served out the rest of the mission like that, a hollow shell of what he had been. When we surfaced, he was immediately transferred off the shadow fin and sent to a psychiatric facility. I never heard what happened to him after that, and I never asked. That was what happened when you broke Rule 1. The knocking started about 3 months into my service aboard the Shadowfin. We were deep, deeper than we usually went, following a course that took us through a trench system that was not marked on any of our official charts. The captain had ordered all non-essential personnel to their bunks, leaving only a skeleton crew to maintain the submarine's basic operations. I was in the reactor room with Nick, one of the engineers performing a routine maintenance check. Nick was a big man, broad-shouldered and heavily muscled, with a thick beard and a deep, booming laugh that seemed incongruous with the claustrophobic environment of the submarine. He had been on the Shadowfin for 7 years, longer than almost anyone else aboard, and he had a reputation for being unflappable. We were working in comfortable silence when we heard it. Knock, knock, knock. It was coming from outside the hull. From the starboard side of the reactor room, 3 slow, deliberate knocks, each one distinct and clear despite the thickness of the steel between us and the ocean. I froze, my hand still gripping the wrench I had been using. "Did you hear that?" I asked. Nick did not look up from his work. "Hear what?" he said, his voice carefully neutral. Knock, knock, knock. There it was again, in the exact same pattern, coming from the exact same location. "That," I said. "Someone is knocking on the hull." "No one is knocking on the hull," Nick said, still not looking at me. "We are at 800 feet. Nothing outside could knock on the hull, just a contraction in the metal, or debris floating by." Ignore it, but I could not ignore it. Because it was not random, it was deliberate. It was rhythmic. It was intentional. Knock, knock, knock. "Nick, that is not debris," I said. "That is someone knocking. Like they are trying to get our attention." Finally, Nick looked up at me. His expression was serious, almost stern. "Listen to me carefully, Robert. There is nothing outside this submarine that wants our attention for any good reason. Whatever you think you are hearing, do not acknowledge it. Do not look toward the sound. Do not talk about it except to tell me that you heard it. Just continue working. The knocking will stop eventually. I remembered Rule 2. If you hear knocking on the hull, do not acknowledge it. Do not look toward the source. Do not speak about it. But the rule did not say anything about how long the knocking would last. It did not say anything about what would happen if we ignored it, and it did not explain what could possibly be outside the submarine, at 800 feet below the surface, knocking on our hull. Knock, knock, knock. It continued for the next 10 minutes. Always the same pattern, always the same location, always the same slow, deliberate rhythm. I forced myself to keep working, to focus on the task at hand, to ignore the cold dread that was spreading through my chest. Then the knocking changed. Knock, 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 knock. It was faster now, more insistent, more urgent, like whatever was outside was getting impatient, getting frustrated that we were not responding. Nick's hands had stopped moving. He was no longer pretending to work. He was just standing there staring at his tools, his jaw clenched tight. Knock, knock, knock. Louder now, hard enough that I could feel the vibrations through the deck plating beneath my feet, hard enough that I wondered if whatever was out there could actually damage the hull. Nick, I whispered, how long does this usually last? Depends, he said quietly. Sometimes 10 minutes, sometimes an hour. Once it went on for 3 hours straight. Just keep ignoring it. It will stop, but what if it did not stop? What if whatever was out there kept knocking, kept trying to get in until it finally succeeded? Knock, 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 5 knocks now, rapid and angry, reverberating through the entire reactor room. I could see the gauges on the wall vibrating slightly with each impact. Should we tell the captain? I asked. Nick shook his head. Not unless it goes on for more than 30 minutes. Those are the rules. If it goes past 30 minutes, we write him a note. We do not speak it aloud. Why not? I asked. Why do we have to write it down? Nick looked at me, and for the first time I saw genuine fear in his eyes. Because the moment you speak about it, the moment you put words to what is happening, it knows you are listening. It knows you are aware, and that is when things get worse. I did not ask what he meant by worse. I did not want to know. The knocking continued for another 15 minutes, varying in intensity and rhythm, sometimes slow and methodical, sometimes fast and frantic, sometimes so hard that I was certain the hull would buckle. But exactly 29 minutes after it started, it stopped. The silence that followed was absolute and deafening. Nick and I stood there in the reactor room, not moving, not speaking, just listening to the normal sounds of the submarine and waiting to see if the knocking would resume. It did not. Nick let out a long breath and went back to his work as though nothing had happened. I tried to do the same, but my hands were shaking so badly that I could barely hold my tools. What was that? I finally asked. What was knocking on the hull? I told you, Nick said without looking at me. Nothing. There is nothing out there. There cannot be anything out there. So we ignore it and we move on. But I knew he was lying. Not to me, but to himself. Because I had seen the look in his eyes when the knocking got loud. I had seen the fear, the recognition, the knowledge that something was out there, something impossible, something that should not exist. Over the next 3 years, I heard the knocking dozens of times. Sometimes it happened when we were deep, sometimes when we were at shallower depths, sometimes it was faint and distant, sometimes it was so close and so loud that it felt like the hull would split open, sometimes it lasted for a few minutes, sometimes for hours, and twice it went on for more than 30 minutes. The first time I was with Tyler in the sonar room. We dutifully wrote a note to the captain, sealed it in an envelope, and delivered it to his quarters. He read the note, nodded once, and then burned it in an ashtray. He never said a word about it, and we never asked. The second time was worse. Much worse. It was about 18 months ago. We were at cruising depth, somewhere off the continental shelf when the knocking started. But this time it was not just coming from one location. It was coming from everywhere. The entire hull was being struck simultaneously, as though hundreds of hands were pounding on the submarine from all sides. The sound was deafening, overwhelming, inescapable. The entire submarine seemed to vibrate with each impact. Crew members emerged from their bunks, pale and frightened, looking around wildly for the source of the noise. Captain James appeared in the corridor, his face grim. All hands, return to your stations immediately. Do not speak. Do not panic. Follow your training. We scrambled to obey, but the knocking continued, louder and louder, faster and faster. It sounded like the ocean itself was trying to crush us, to break us open like an egg. I was at my station in the control room when I saw it. One of the external cameras was still functioning, pointing out into the darkness beyond the hull. And in that darkness I saw movement shapes. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. They were vague and indistinct, more like shadows than solid forms, but they were there. They were surrounding the submarine, pressing against the hull, striking it with what looked like hands or fins or tentacles, or something that could not be properly described. I opened my mouth to say something, to point it out to the others, but Tyler grabbed my shoulder and shook his head violently. His eyes were wide with terror, and he put a finger to his lips in a silent command for silence. I closed my mouth and forced myself to look away from the camera. The knocking continued for 47 minutes. 47 minutes of unrelenting, mind-breaking noise that made it impossible to think, impossible to focus, impossible to do anything except endure. And then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The silence was so abrupt, so total, that it felt like the world had ended. We all stood there in the control room, not moving, not breathing, just waiting. Captain James finally spoke, his voice hoarse. Damage report. One by one, the section chiefs reported in. Reactor room, nominal. Engine room, nominal. Hull integrity, nominal. Life support, nominal. Everything was fine. The submarine had not been damaged at all. Despite 47 minutes of what sounded like a sustained attack from outside, there was not a single dent, not a single scratch, not a single indication that anything had touched us. It was impossible. But it was true. Captain James dismissed us back to our duties without any explanation, without any discussion of what had just happened. We returned to our stations and our bunks and our routines as though nothing had occurred, but I went back to the control room later and reviewed the footage from the external camera. The shapes were still there, recorded in grainy, low-light video. Dozens of them surrounding the submarine, moving in ways that made my eyes hurt to watch. I made the mistake of trying to count them. I got to 37 before I had to stop because my head was throbbing and I felt like I was going to vomit. I never looked at that footage again. That was what happened when the knocking went on for too long. Something out there in the deep noticed us. Something out there in the dark wanted in. And the only thing that kept it from succeeding was our refusal to acknowledge it. Our refusal to give it the recognition it craved. As long as we followed Rule 2, as long as we ignored the knocking and pretended it was not happening, we were safe. But I often wondered what would happen if someone decided to knock back. The forward observation room was located at the very front of the submarine, past the torpedo tubes, past the sonar equipment at the tip of the bow. It was a small room, barely large enough for 2 people, with a single reinforced porthole that looked out into the ocean ahead of us. In theory, it was used for visual navigation in shallow waters, for observing marine life, for conducting scientific research. In practice, no one except the captain and the designated observer ever entered that room, and they never talked about what they saw there. I first became aware of the room during my initial tour of the submarine. We were walking through the forward section when we passed a hatch with a heavy steel door and a wheel lock. There was no label on the door, no sign indicating what was behind it, just a small red light mounted above it that was always on. "What is in there?" I asked Tyler, who was showing me around. Tyler glanced at the door and then quickly looked away. "The forward observation room. It is off limits. Do not go in there unless you are specifically assigned as observer." "Why? What is inside?" "I do not know," Tyler said, and I could tell he was telling the truth. "I have never been inside. No one has except the captain and the observers, and they do not talk about it." "Who are the observers?" I asked. "They rotate. Different people get assigned for different missions. You will know if you are assigned because the captain will brief you privately. Until then, do not ask questions about it. Do not try to look inside. And if you ever see that door open when no one should be in there, close it immediately and report to the captain." I wanted to press for more information, but the look on Tyler's face told me the conversation was over. For the first year of my service, I had no interaction with the forward observation room. I walked past it dozens of times, always noting the red light above the door. always feeling a strange unease whenever I got too close to it. Sometimes I would pause and listen, pressing my ear close to the door, trying to hear what was happening inside. I never heard anything. No voices, no movement, no sound at all. Just silence. Then about 14 months into my service, I was called to the captain's quarters. Captain James was sitting at his desk reviewing a stack of papers. He looked up when I entered and gestured for me to sit. "Robert," he said, "you have been selected for observer duty on our next mission." My stomach dropped. "Sir?" "You will be spending 6-hour shifts in the forward observation room, monitoring the waters ahead of us and reporting anything unusual directly to me. This is a critical position and it requires absolute discretion and mental fortitude. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," I said, though I did not understand at all. "What exactly am I observing?" Captain James leaned back in his chair and studied me for a long moment. "You will be looking out the porthole into the ocean. Most of the time you will see nothing. Just darkness. But occasionally you will see things. Your job is to observe these things, note their appearance and behavior, and report them to me. You are not to interpret what you see. You are not to form theories about what you see. You are not to speak to anyone else about what you see. You observe, you report, and you forget." "Can you do that?" "I think so, sir," I said, feeling increasingly uneasy. "You think so?" Captain James's voice hardened. "That is not good enough, Robert. I need to know that you can handle this. Because if you cannot, if you break down or panic or try to leave your post early, it puts the entire submarine at risk. So I will ask you again, can you do this?" I swallowed hard. "Yes, sir. I can do this." He held my gaze for another moment, then nodded. "Good. Your first shift begins tomorrow at 6 a.m. You will relieve the current observer. He will not speak to you and you will not speak to him. You will enter the observation room. He will leave and you will secure the door behind you. You will remain in the room for 6 hours. There is a notebook and pen inside. Use them to record anything you see. When your shift ends, you will leave the notebook in the room, secure the door behind you, and report directly to me. Do not deviate from these instructions. Do not discuss what you see with anyone. And Robert?" "Yes, sir?" "If at any point you see the door to the observation room open when no one should be inside, close it immediately. Do not look inside. Do not investigate. Just close the door and report to me. This is extremely important. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," I said. The next morning, I made my way to the forward observation room at exactly 6 a.m. The red light above the door was glowing, indicating that someone was inside. I stood there nervously waiting until finally I heard the wheel lock turning from the inside. The door opened and a sailor I vaguely recognized stepped out. He was pale, sweating despite the cool air, and his hands were trembling. He looked at me briefly, his eyes hollow and haunted, and then hurried past me without a word. I stepped into the observation room and immediately felt the temperature drop. It was noticeably colder inside, cold enough that I could see my breath. The room was exactly as I had imagined, small, cramped, with gray metal walls and a single porthole about 2 feet in diameter at the far end. I closed the door behind me and spun the wheel lock, securing it from the inside. Then I approached the porthole. What I saw made me understand why the observers never talked about their experiences. The porthole looked out into the ocean, but it was not the normal black void that I had seen through other viewports on the submarine. Instead, the water outside was filled with a faint, sickly green luminescence like the glow of bioluminescent algae, but wrong somehow, pulsing and shifting in patterns that made my eyes hurt. And in that green glow, I could see shapes. They were distant at first, vague forms moving through the water, darting in and out of visibility. But as I watched, they came closer. They were not fish. They were not whales or squids or any kind of marine life I could identify. They were something else entirely. Some of them looked almost human, pale and elongated with limbs that bent at impossible angles. Others were shapeless masses that drifted through the water like oil in water, constantly changing form. And still others were geometric impossibilities, shapes that seemed to exist in more dimensions than my eyes could properly process. They moved with purpose. They swam in patterns around the submarine, circling us, following us, watching us. And occasionally one would come right up to the porthole and press itself against the glass. When that happened, I could see details I wished I could not. I could see what might have been faces, or the suggestion of faces with too many eyes or no eyes at all. with mouths that opened into darkness, with expressions that conveyed emotions I had no names for. I forced myself to remain calm, to do as the captain had instructed. I picked up the notebook and pen that were sitting on a small shelf beside the porthole and began to write. 15 a.m. Multiple shapes visible in the water, various forms and sizes. Some appear organic, others do not. They are circling the submarine. I continued to observe and record throughout my 6-hour shift. The shapes never went away. They were constantly present, constantly moving, constantly watching. Sometimes they would drift away into the distance and I would feel a brief moment of relief, but they always came back. Around 9 a.m., something different happened. One of the shapes, one that looked vaguely humanoid but with arms that were far too long and a head that tilted at an angle that would break a normal neck, came up to the porthole and stayed there. It pressed itself against the glass and just looked at me. I could not see its eyes if it had eyes, but I could feel its gaze. I could feel it studying me, analyzing me, trying to understand me. And I had the distinct and terrifying impression that it recognized me, that it knew me, that it had been waiting for me. I wrote in the notebook with shaking hands. 9:03 a.m. One shape maintaining position at porthole. Appears to be observing me. Duration ongoing. It stayed there for 45 minutes. 45 minutes of unblinking observation, of that terrible sense of recognition, of feeling like something was looking not at me but into me, reading my thoughts, examining my memories, understanding things about me that I did not understand about myself. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it drifted away into the green glow and disappeared. My shift ended at noon. I left the notebook in the observation room, secured the door behind me and went directly to the captain's quarters as instructed. He read my report in silence, his expression never changing, and then filed it away in a locked drawer. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Honestly, sir." I said, "Terrified," he nodded. "That is normal. The first shift is always the hardest, but you did well. You observed, you recorded, you did not panic. You will have 3 more shifts this week, and then you will rotate off observer duty for the next mission. Can you handle 3 more shifts?" I wanted to say no. I wanted to refuse, to demand an explanation, to ask what those things were and why we were observing them. But I also knew that would accomplish nothing. The captain would not answer my questions and I would still have to complete my observer duties. "Yes, sir," I said. "I can handle it." Over the next week, I completed 3 more shifts in the forward observation room. Each one was different, but all of them were equally disturbing. I saw things that defied description. Things that moved in ways that violated the laws of physics, things that looked at me with an intelligence and awareness that made my skin crawl. But I observed, I recorded, and I reported. And when my observer duty was complete, I tried very hard to forget what I had seen. I was never assigned as observer again, and for that, I was grateful. But I often wondered what happened to the sailors who were assigned, mission after mission, shift after shift. How long could someone look into that observation room before it broke them? How long before the things outside stopped being just observers and became something more? I got my answer about 6 months later. I was walking through the forward section on my way to the torpedo room when I passed the observation room. The red light above the door was off, which meant no one was supposed to be inside. But as I walked past, I heard something. A voice. It was coming from inside the observation room, muffled by the heavy door but distinct enough that I could make out words. "Yes, I see you. I understand now. I know what you want," and I stopped, my blood running cold. Someone was in the observation room when they should not be, and they were talking to something. I remembered Rule 3. If you see the door to the observation room open when no one should be inside, close it immediately and report to the captain. Do not look inside under any circumstances. But the door was not open. It was closed and locked. So what was I supposed to do? I reached for the wheel lock and began to turn it, intending to open the door and see who was inside. But before I could complete the turn, a hand grabbed my wrist. I spun around to find Captain James standing behind me, his face pale and his eyes wide with alarm. "Do not open that door," he said quietly. "But sir, someone is inside. I can hear them talking." "I know," he said, "but you must not open that door. Come with me. Now." He pulled me away from the observation room, down the corridor and into a nearby storage compartment. He closed the door behind us and turned to face me. "Listen to me very carefully," he said, his voice low and urgent. "What you heard in that room was not a crew member. Do you understand? But I heard a voice. Someone was talking in there. What you heard was something pretending to be a crew member, something that has learned to mimic human speech. It does that sometimes when the observation room is empty. It tries to lure people inside. If you had opened that door, if you had looked inside, it would have been the last thing you ever did. I felt dizzy, nauseated. What is it? What is in there? I do not know, Captain James admitted. No one knows. But sometimes when the observation room is left unoccupied for too long, something from outside finds a way in. Not physically. The hull is intact, but something gets in nonetheless. And when that happens, the only thing we can do is wait for it to leave. It usually takes a few hours. Until then, we stay away from that section of the submarine, and we do not, under any circumstances, open that door. Has anyone ever opened the door when that thing was inside? I asked, though I was not sure I wanted to know the answer. Captain James nodded slowly. Once, about 8 years ago, before I was captain, a sailor heard the voice just like you did. He thought someone needed help. He opened the door to check on them. He paused, his face darkening. They found him 3 days later. He was still alive, technically. Still breathing, still functioning, but he was not human anymore. Not really. They kept him sedated in the medical bay until we could surface and transfer him to a secure facility. I saw him once before they took him away. His eyes were wrong. His movements were wrong. And when he spoke, it was not his voice that came out. It was dozens of voices layered on top of each other, speaking in languages that do not exist. I felt bile rising in my throat. What happened to him? I do not know, Captain James said. I do not ask questions about things like that. I just make sure it does not happen to anyone else on my watch, which is why you need to understand. If you ever hear anything from that observation room when it should be empty, if you ever see that door open when no one should be inside, you do not investigate. You come find me immediately. Understood? Yes, sir, I whispered. We stayed in the storage compartment for another hour before Captain James finally deemed it safe to leave. When we passed by the observation room again, it was silent. The red light was still off. Whatever had been inside was gone. But I never walked past that room again without feeling a chill of dread, without wondering if something was inside right now, waiting, listening, learning how to be human so it could lure someone into opening the door. That was what Rule 3 protected us from. Not just the things outside the submarine, but the things that sometimes found their way inside. The lights aboard the Shadowfin were old and temperamental. They flickered sometimes, dimmed and brightened unpredictably, and occasionally went out entirely, plunging sections of the submarine into complete darkness until someone could replace the bulbs or fix the wiring. We were all used to it. It was just part of life aboard an aging vessel that had been in service far longer than it should have been. But there was one pattern of flickering that was different. One pattern that meant something terrible was happening. 3 short flashes followed by 2 long flashes. And if you saw that pattern, you ran. I first witnessed this phenomenon about 2 years into my service. We were at cruising depth, running silent through an area of ocean that the charts marked only as restricted access. I was in the crew quarters, lying in my bunk and reading a book when the lights above me began to flicker. Flash, 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 on our flash, on our flash. 3 short, 2 long. I sat up immediately, my heart pounding. Around me, the other crew members who were off duty were also sitting up, their faces pale. Was that? Mike started to say. Everyone out. Tyler shouted, already moving toward the exit. Evacuate now. Do not stop for anything. We scrambled out of our bunks and ran for the hatch. Behind us, the lights flickered again in the same pattern. 3 short, 2 long. 3 short, 2 long. We spilled out into the corridor and kept running, heading aft toward the mess hall. Behind us, I could hear the hatch slamming shut as Tyler sealed the crew quarters. We reached the mess hall, breathless and frightened, and found that other crew members were already gathering there. They had evacuated from different sections of the submarine, all with the same look of panic on their faces. Captain James appeared, his expression grim. Sound off. Who was in the affected section? Crew quarters, sir, Tyler reported. All personnel evacuated safely. Section sealed. Anyone left inside? The captain asked. No, sir, Tyler said. I did a visual sweep before sealing the hatch. The section was empty, the captain nodded. Good. All personnel are to remain here in the mess hall until further notice. No one is to approach the crew quarters. No one is to attempt to investigate what is happening in there. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir," we all responded in unison. We waited in the mess hall for hours. No one spoke. No one asked questions. We all just sat there, listening to the normal sounds of the submarine and trying not to think about what might be happening in the sealed section. Finally, after what felt like an eternity but was actually about 4 hours, Captain James stood up. "The lights have returned to normal," he announced. "The section is safe to re-enter. Tyler, Nick, you are with me. We will conduct an inspection before allowing anyone else back inside." The three of them left the mess hall, and the rest of us waited anxiously for their return. When they came back 20 minutes later, they all looked shaken. "The section is clear," Captain James said. "You may return to your bunks. However, I want everyone to be aware that some of your personal items may be displaced. Do not be alarmed. Simply gather what you can find and continue with your duties." We returned to the crew quarters cautiously. The lights were functioning normally now, steady and bright. But as I entered, I understood what the captain had meant by displaced. The entire section looked like it had been turned upside down and shaken. Bunks were overturned, lockers were hanging open with their contents scattered across the floor. Pictures and personal items that had been carefully secured were now lying in random piles. It looked like a tornado had torn through the space. But it was not just the physical displacement that was disturbing. It was the wrongness of it. The items were not just scattered randomly. They were arranged in patterns, geometric designs that seemed almost deliberate, almost meaningful, but in a way that made my head hurt to look at too long. And there was a smell. That same sickly sweet smell that I had noticed when I first boarded the Shadowfin, but stronger now, concentrated, overwhelming. "What happened here?" I asked Tyler quietly as we began to clean up. "I do not know," he said, his voice tight. "No one knows. But it happens sometimes when the lights flicker in that pattern. Something gets into the sealed section. Something that rearranges things, moves things, changes things. Sometimes the changes are minor. Sometimes they are more significant." "Has anyone ever been caught in a section when the lights started flickering?" I asked. Tyler's face went pale. "Once, a sailor named Davis. It was before your time. He was in the head when the lights started flickering in that pattern. By the time he realized what was happening and tried to get out, someone had already sealed the section from the outside, following protocol. He was trapped inside for 3 hours. What happened to him?" I asked, though part of me did not want to know. When we opened the section again, we found him sitting in the corner. He was alive, uninjured physically, but he would not stop screaming. Just kept screaming and screaming until his voice gave out. They sedated him, took him to the medical bay, tried to get him to tell them what he had experienced. But he could not. Every time he tried to talk about it, he would start screaming again. They ended up transferring him off the submarine at the next port. I heard he spent the rest of his life in a psychiatric facility, never speaking, just sitting in his room and staring at the walls. I felt sick. So if someone is in the section when the lights start flickering, they are already gone, Tyler finished quietly. The person who comes out might look like them, might technically be them, but something fundamental has changed. Something has been taken from them or added to them or rearranged inside them, and they will never be the same. Over the next year, I witnessed the flickering lights 3 more times. Each time we evacuated the affected section immediately, sealed it off, and waited for the lights to return to normal. Each time we found the section rearranged when we returned, items displaced and reorganized in those disturbing geometric patterns. But the worst incident happened about 6 months ago. We were deep, deeper than I had ever been, following some classified mission parameters that only the captain and the navigation officer knew. The submarine was running at minimal power to maintain stealth, which meant many of the non-essential systems were shut down, including most of the lights. I was in the engine room with Nick, performing maintenance on one of the backup generators, when we heard shouting from the corridor outside. "Lights! The lights are flickering!" Nick and I looked at each other, then looked up at the lights in the engine room. They were steady, showing no sign of flickering. "Not here," Nick said. "Must be another section." We heard the sound of running feet, of hatches slamming, of crew members evacuating. Then suddenly the lights in the engine room began to flicker. "Flash, flash, 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 go!" Nick shouted. "Get out now!" We ran for the exit, but as we reached the hatch, we heard a voice behind us. "Wait! Help me!" We turned and saw someone in the far corner of the engine room. It was too dark to see clearly, and the flickering lights made it even harder to make out details. But it looked like one of our crew members, someone who had been trapped in the engine room when the light started. "Come on," the figure shouted. "We need to get out of here together." I started to move toward him, but Nick grabbed my arm and pulled me back. "No," he said firmly. "That is not one of us." "But he needs help," I protested. "Look at the shadows," Nick hissed. I looked, and then I saw it. The figure was standing in the flickering light, but its shadow was not moving correctly. While the figure gestured and moved, the shadow remained still, or moved in ways that did not match the movements of the body. And as I watched, I realized the shadow had more limbs than the figure did, more dimensions than it should have, more depth than should be possible. "That is not human," Nick said. "That is never human. Run. Now." We bolted through the hatch and Nick sealed it behind us. Through the small porthole window in the door, I could see the figure still standing in the engine room, still calling for help, still gesturing for us to come back. But now that I was looking at it properly, I could see all the ways it was wrong. The proportions were slightly off. The movements were too smooth, too fluid. The voice was slightly too perfect, lacking the natural imperfections of human speech. It was something wearing the shape of a human like a costume, but it did not quite fit right. We ran to the mess hall and reported what we had seen to Captain James. He listened without interrupting, his face grave. "You did the right thing," he said when we finished. "Never, under any circumstances, go back for someone who is still in the section after the lights start flickering. They are already gone. What you see calling for help is not them. It is something else wearing their face." "But what if they are real?" I asked. "What if they are actually trapped and need help?" Captain James looked at me with tired, sad eyes. "Then they are already lost. And if you go back for them, you will be lost too. That is the mercy of Rule 4. It is not kind, but it keeps the rest of us alive." We waited 6 hours before the lights in the engine room returned to normal. When we finally opened the hatch and went inside, the section was empty. The figure was gone, but the entire engine room had been rearranged. Tools and equipment moved to different locations, pipes bent at new angles, panels removed and reinstalled in configurations that made no engineering sense. And on the floor, written in what looked like oil but smelled like that sickly sweet scent, were words in a language I did not recognize. They looked almost like English, almost like they should make sense. But the more I tried to read them, the less sense they made. Captain James ordered the words scrubbed away immediately, and he forbade anyone from trying to photograph them or copy them down. Within an hour, all evidence of the writing was gone, and the engine room was slowly being restored to its proper configuration. But I remembered those words. They burned themselves into my memory, and sometimes, late at night when I am trying to sleep, I find myself thinking about them, trying to decode them, trying to understand what they meant. And I know that is exactly what I should not be doing. That was Rule 4. When the lights flickered in that specific pattern, you evacuated immediately. You did not go back for anyone. You did not investigate. You sealed the section and waited. Because whatever was happening in that space, whatever was entering our reality through some crack we could not see or understand, it was not something humans were meant to encounter, and those who did encounter it were never truly human again. I have been on shore leave for 2 weeks now. In 3 days, I am supposed to report back to the Shadowfin for another 6-month deployment. But I do not think I can go back, not because I am afraid. I have been afraid for 3 years and I have survived. But because I am starting to understand something that I wish I did not understand. The Shadowfin is not just a submarine. It is a prison, or maybe a lighthouse, or maybe both. Something is down there in the deep places of the ocean, something old, something vast, something that exists in dimensions we cannot perceive and operates according to rules we cannot comprehend. And the Shadowfin, with its strange rules and its endless patrols through the darkest waters, is keeping it contained. Or at least keeping it distracted. The knocking on the hull is not random. It is communication. It is trying to understand us, to learn our patterns, to find a weakness. The things we see through the forward observation room porthole are not just watching us. They are studying us. Every observer who goes into that room, every shift spent staring at those shapes, is giving them more information about humanity, more understanding of how we think and feel and fear. The voices during the graveyard shift are not trying to lure us away. They are trying to replace us. Every sailor who has followed those voices, who has broken Rule 1 and wandered off alone, has made space for something else to take their place. And the flickering lights, that specific pattern that signals evacuation, that is not a warning of danger. That is the moment when the barrier between our world and theirs grows thin, when something from the other side tries to push through into our reality. The rules keep us safe, but they also keep us ignorant. Because if we truly understood what was happening, if we truly comprehended what we were dealing with, none of us would ever set foot on that submarine again. I have started having dreams. In these dreams, I am back in the forward observation room, looking out through the porthole. But instead of seeing the shapes moving through the green glow, I see myself. Dozens of versions of myself, hundreds of versions, all staring back at me through the glass. And they are all smiling in a way I have never smiled, with expressions on my face that I have never made. In the dreams, they press their hands against the porthole from the outside, and I realize that I am not inside the submarine looking out. I am outside the submarine looking in. I have been outside the entire time, and the person I thought was me, the person who has been living my life for the past 3 years, is something else wearing my face. I wake up from these dreams in a cold sweat, my heart racing, unable to shake the feeling that the dream is true, that I am not who I think I am, that somewhere during one of those missions, during one of those shifts in the observation room, or one of those evacuations from flickering light sections, or one of those graveyard shifts, when I heard my name being called, I stopped being Robert and became something else. How would I know? How would anyone know? If something could perfectly replicate a human being, down to memories and thoughts and feelings, would there be any way to tell the difference? I have been sitting in this motel room for 2 weeks asking myself that question, and I have not found an answer. In 3 days, I am supposed to report back to the Shadowfin. Captain James is expecting me. The crew is expecting me. And somewhere in the deep, dark places of the ocean, something else is expecting me too. I do not know if I will go back. I do not know if I am even capable of making that choice anymore. Because if I am not really Robert, if I am something wearing his face, then my decisions are not my own. My thoughts are not my own. My fears are not my own. All I know is this: the ocean has ghosts. They live in the spaces between water molecules, in the pressure that crushes steel, in the darkness that has never seen light. They are patient. They are intelligent. And they are waiting. The Shadowfin and its crew, with our strange rules and our classified missions, are all that stands between those ghosts and the world above. We are the watchers in the deep, the guards at the gate, the thin line between reality and something else. And I fear that line is growing thinner every day. So I am writing this down. I am leaving this record. Because if I do go back to the Shadowfin, if I do report for duty in 3 days, and if something happens to me down there in the dark, I want someone to know the truth. The rules are real. The dangers are real. And if you ever find yourself aboard a submarine with strange rules that do not make sense, rules that seem designed to protect you from impossible things, follow them. Follow them exactly, without question, without exception. Because the moment you break those rules, the moment you decide that you know better or that you are brave enough to face what lies beyond them, you are already lost, and something else will take your place. I can hear the ocean outside my window. The waves are calling to me. They sound like my name. I do not think I'm going to make it to that deployment in 3 days. I do not think I'm going to make it through tonight. But if you are reading this, if you have found this account, then you need to understand something. The Shadowfin is still down there. The crew is still following the rules, and the things in the deep are still watching, still waiting, still trying to find a way through. Do not go looking for answers in the deep places. Do not try to understand what cannot be understood. And if you ever hear knocking on a hull, if you ever see lights flickering in a pattern of 3 short flashes followed by 2 long flashes, if you ever hear your name being called between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., if you ever see a door that should be locked standing open, run, and do not look back, because they are always watching. They are always listening, and they are always hungry for more. The ocean has ghosts, and now, I think I am one of them.